Hi, thanks for tuning into Working Musicians. I'm your host, Dris Organica, and today I'm going to be talking about spending wisely. I'd also like to thank Miller High Life for giving me the motivation to do this episode. Alright, so today I'm going to just be talking about guitars and spending wisely when it comes to your guitar chain, all the way from guitars, amps, just whatever, anything in between, anything outside of that. Because, man, oh man, do people make a lot of dumb purchasing decisions when it comes to this, myself included. Now, I think I've admitted I've been doing this guitar thing for about 15 years, so what I'm hoping is that maybe if somebody hears this, maybe it'll help reaffirm some of their own beliefs or help them kind of cut through the noise of marketing hype and all that mumbo jumbo, and hopefully help prevent people from making the same kind of mistakes that I have and the same kind of mistakes that I've seen others make, especially when they're kind of early on in their musical guitar playing career or hobby, what have you. So the big thing is, okay, so you want to play guitar, right? That's awesome. A lot of people want to play a guitar, and people have their own motivation and reasons and how hard they're willing to work to get to a certain point. And there's nothing wrong with not wanting to be the world's best guitar player. I've met a lot of people who their real goal is just to be able to pick up a guitar and be able to play along at a campfire jam or be able to play Christian music for their household. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's probably the camp that I would say 50% of us probably live in as guitar players. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. However, when it comes to buying your first guitar, there are definitely a few things people need to think about. And obviously price plays a big factor in this. So there's something to be said about buy cheap, buy twice, but there's also something to be said about why buy a $3,000 Martin if your goal is to just be able to play along at the campfire. I don't think bringing a $3,000 instrument is a good idea out in a camping situation. So what are some things that people should look out for when they're buying their first guitar? Well, obviously, cost is going to be a big determining factor. What's your budget on a guitar? I don't think it's necessary to go drop several $1,000s on your first electric or acoustic guitar. It's probably not a good idea to drop, $100 and think that you're going to be satisfied with it for any extended period of time. And here's largely why. A, that $100 guitar likely sounds like crap, and B, it likely plays awful. They just don't tend to play very well. Now, I'm not saying I haven't personally bought, that little $120 acoustic guitar for the campfire sort of situation. And not to say that it didn't play okay. In fact, I found that, cheap little electric and acoustic guitars that for around the $100 mark that actually play pretty decent. Now, the other side is they sound bad. And I know it. They don't hold the tune especially well, but I think it was a company called Alvarez of all people. It was like, okay, I couldn't believe how playable this guitar was and how decent it sounded considering that it was like $100. But finding those are few and far between and generally speaking, when you're looking for them, you won't find them. And with something that's on that $100 price range, the quality control is so bad. I mean, to the point where like if you had 5 of the same guitar in the shop, you'd have 5 probably very different products where some of them where they just sound different and all play different. So definitely there's something to be said about staying away from your bottom of the barrel guitars. But at some point it's like, okay, Dris, don't buy something that's $100 and don't buy something that's $3,000. So where should I go? How much should I spend? And that's a very good question. I think a lot of that has to do with what your goals are and where you honestly see yourself being in several years. And something that I think most of us who are long-term guitar players have known, have come to find out that very few of us have just 1 or 2 guitars. I'm one of those guys who eventually I start selling stuff off, but I have a tendency to buy many cheaper guitars. And looking back, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it's one of those things where it's like I have a guitar, it starts to become in bad repair, and so I just replace it with another $300 Wonder. And every few years, I'm having to change it out because it's just rusted. It just doesn't play good. It never sounded that good to begin with, and it's just not even worth the trouble it takes to maintain it. So if your goal is just simply to learn an instrument for the fun of it, you know you're not going to ever really spend the time it takes to master it and become a professional or even a semi-pro guitar player. It's not really necessary to drop a grand sum of money, you know. But at the same time, if you're trying to learn on an instrument that's more of a toy than an actual instrument, you're going to find that it's very frustrating because they just are hard to play. They don't sound good. And if you were to have upgraded to something that was, maybe from $100 to like $300 or $400, you begin to realize there's such a huge difference that goes into it. And just for, let's take acoustic guitars, for example, at around the $400 range, you can find very decent sounding guitars that are very playable. And the reason for this is at that price point, you start to get into guitars that have solid tops on the body. What I mean by that is if you look at the front of the guitar, the big piece of wood that's underneath the strings and around the sound hole, once again, I'm talking about acoustic guitars at the moment, it's a solid piece of wood. While everything else on the body and the back and the sides might be high pressure laminate, basically particle boards just squished together under high pressures to form a solid piece of wood. If your entire instrument is high pressure laminate, they just, A, they don't sound as good, B, and they also don't hold up very well. You start to begin to notice that the bodies start to warp just a little bit, and it makes it to where it is almost impossible to really make that thing stay in tune or play very well. The action of the strings, the distance between them, how hard you have to push it. I call these guitars knuckle busters. The ones where it's like you just have to monster mash the strings to get them to ring true. And while sure, if you've been playing for, quite a while, you can get away with it, but it's not enjoyable. I mean, if I've been playing for 15 years and I get on someone's little $100 acoustic guitar and it's just, my fingers are just bleeding after about 20 minutes of playing it, there is no way that somebody who's a beginner is going to ever progress on something like that. Not to say that you can't go in there and sand down the bridge a little bit, sand down the nut or anything like that, but realistically, at the point that you're spending, just a few $100s on an instrument, that's probably not something you're really looking to do, is to spend, $100 for a guitar tech to go and, fine tune it, make sure the intonation's good and that the playability is good. And something else to take into consideration is if you spend that your first, year or two learning how to play an acoustic guitar that just has terrible playability and the action is awful, it's going to affect how you learn the instrument, and in a negative way for the most part. This is something I can speak to. When I first started playing, I had a cheap acoustic that I got from Best Buy. Not exactly the most renowned brick and mortar store to go for acoustic instruments. And I hated that thing. After about 3-4 months, I ended up getting a cheap electric guitar with a little combo amp, little starter kit for I think about $300. And it was just like after that, I couldn't go back to the acoustic. Now, while I still have that intro guitar, looking back on it now, it's just like, well, that was actually, I think, a pretty good purchase. I wish I would have never spent the $100 I spent on that cheap Best Buy guitar, because that thing was a complete piece of crap. It wasn't usable. The thing broke down. I called it the Santana Special. You could hit go up the neck, 4, 5, 6 frets in a row, and they were the exact same note. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. When you buy these cheap instruments, they're really not instruments, they're toys. So, and I've kind of noticed that once you start to get to about the $400 range in particular, even less on the used market, of course, you start to get into something that's more of an instrument and less of a toy. And then at some point, once you get closer to like the 1,000 on up range, that's when you really start to notice the difference between, an instrument and a fine precision tool, which is something along the lines of a Martin D28 or a Paul Reed Smith or one of these fancy Gibsons, you begin to notice that, oh, there's a world of difference. But if you're just starting out, there's no point in buying a $3,000 Paul Reed Smith, because it's just not going to, you're not going to make that guitar sound good. It's still going to sound bad. Although there is something to be said that it will play good and it'll sound as good. You'll actually sound a little bit better playing something like that than you would that cheap little Fender Squire that may or may not sound good. So I talked a little bit about trying to, at least start off with an acoustic guitar that has a solid top body. And typical things you'll see is a solid spruce top. That's usually a pretty good blend between, warmth and high-end sparkle. Well, that tends to be what I prefer. At the end of the day, I ended up buying a solid top mahogany guitar, even though I usually hate the way mahogany sounds. For whatever reason, this one sounded great. So don't rule out different wood choices just because you generally don't like one. I happened to find a guitar that was just like, hey, I thought I liked the way it looked, but I'm like, oh, mahogany, I'm not going to like it. And boy, was I surprised. Well, my favorite acoustic guitar is a Martin D21 Special. It's kind of like a reissue guitar. It's just the right blend between the D18 and the D28 for my playing style and taste. Not to say that I don't think the D28 is not a fine guitar. The D18 isn't a fine guitar. It's just for whatever reason that the D21 Special seems to be the perfect blend between feel when you're playing it and just the overall sound. And it just has this warmth to it that I love. But that's around, I don't know, $2,800 guitar, $2,500, something like that. So, I was very tempted at one point to drop the money on it. I ended up finding out, okay, this is the sound I like, right? So now let me see if I can find something that comes close to it for less money. And I was able to find that in my Breedlove mahogany solid body guitar. So maybe that's some good advice to take into consideration is go around and start playing some different guitars at your local Guitar Super Center, Guitar Shack, whatever is close to you or wherever you choose to frequent. And beware that the guys that work there want to sell you something, right? So just keep that in mind. That not to say that all guitar salesmen are created equal and that they're all scumbags. Obviously, that's not the case. There are a lot of great guitar salesmen out there, but keep in mind that if the more you know, the more likely you are to come out the situation with an instrument that you will actually use for the next few years to come. But like I said, if you go around and find a guitar that you really like the sound of, that you really like the way it plays, and go from there. But if you're first starting out, you don't have that luxury because you can't play the instrument to begin with. So maybe it's a good idea to go out on to like the pawn shops, right? And look for that guitar that's maybe in the $200 range. Heck, you might even be able to find a $100, guitar that new it might have cost $250, $300, $400, but they've got it there for $100, $150, and it's a steal. It seems like and the other thing is on the used market. Assuming you keep it in good repair, what you pay $200 for today is worth $200 3 years down the road. So you don't really lose the value of it. So if you kind of outgrow that instrument in a few years, you can sell it for probably about what you paid for it, which is a pretty cool thing about the used market. Although with the used market, you get the occasional, oh, this neck is actually broken. The tuss rod's jacked up, or you get little, problems from electronics and just wear and tear. But assuming you played it in the shop and, farted around with it, it's pretty obvious. Hey, every time I turn the volume up, it makes scratchy sounds. Maybe that's not the right instrument for a first timer. But keep in mind that if you start on a toy, you're never going to really progress like you would if you had a real instrument. So, some things to look out for with acoustic guitars in particular is find one that actually has a solid top body on it. The rest can be high pressure laminate. That's fine. And also make sure that, it seems to hold its tune, right? Once again, if you're a beginning guitar player and you don't really know how to play, that might not be so obvious how to do. take a buddy, call somebody. But, there's some good things to do is, hey, if your budget's $100, that's fine. But maybe look for something used at a pawn shop. Because a lot of times these pawn shops that are, really specialize in music and guitars, there seems to be a lot of them that, they sell power tools and guns and jewelry, but they also have 40 guitars. So clearly if they know that a mainstream of their business is musical equipment, there's a lot of shops that tend to be more so music shops than pawn shops. So that might be a good place to go because A, they'll have a good selection, and B, they sell enough of them to where it makes sense for them to have a guy that they use consistently to adjust them and set up the guitars so that they're very, very playable and are easy to play, so to speak, which is something that is generally not the case when you buy a cheap guitar from a guitar store. They're never set up. Okay, so let's move on to buying your first electric guitar. I think it's a good idea to at least know what kind of genre you anticipate playing before you buy an electric guitar, and just search the forums, ask a friend, ask a guitar shop guy. Because, at the point your budget's, $300 for your first electric guitar, there's plenty of guitars to choose from in that price point, whether they be new or used. But even somebody at the shop can at least lead you in the right direction on the right kind of guitar for the style of music you want to play. And what do I mean by this? Is there really that much of a difference? An acoustic guitar is an acoustic guitar, but why is it that electrics seem to be different? A lot of them look different. A preconceived notion that people have is that electric guitars, some of them have just built-in distortion to them. Like, that's just how they sound. And boy, are they in for a world of shock when they find out that that's not how an electric guitar sounds on its own. Right? But let's say, okay, you're interested in playing hard rock, metal, or punk. There's a very good chance that you're going to need a guitar that handles palm muting, right? That's a very important aspect to metal and punk and hard rock. So if you go and buy a certain type of guitar, let's say a Les Paul style that has a stop tailpiece on it, and some of them are definitely the more high-end ones tend to be a little bit less problematic on this thing. They tend to not be very good for palm muting. They sustain too much, they resonate too much, and you can't choke down on it enough with your palm to get that kind of metal palm mute sound that you get, or punk palm muting. Those are, hard rock, metal, punk. Those are three kind of genres that use palm muting quite a bit. And it's kind of one of those things I've been there before where I saw a friend and he's trying to play along with something and he cannot palm mute it. He can't, like, I go to hit something. I'm like, yeah, why are you still playing? He's like, he can't help it. His guitar just does not stop when he chokes down on it with his hand. A, he has a cheap guitar, and B, it has a stop tailpiece, and it just doesn't. It's a different type of bridge, so to speak, that you'd find on a lot of your Gibson style guitars. Gibson Les Pauls, I should be specific. But while I'm not bashing Gibson guitars, clearly they make a fine guitar that's very viable in a lot of genres. Perhaps that's not the correct guitar if you're trying to do punk. Not to say there aren't guitars out there that the body shape looks like a Gibson Les Paul, but they have the through body typical bridge that you would see more so on like a Fender styled guitar. So realistically, you can almost break guitars down into kind of like two genres. I would say your Fender's types and then your Gibson Les Paul types. And what I mean by that is not so much the shape of it or anything like that. It's just more so how the bridges are on them. And if you were to compare the two, you'll kind of see what I'm saying. Not to say that there's not some variations or some really weird things when you get to Floyd Rose floating tremolos. That's a whole conversation unto itself. Boy, do I love and hate those things all at the same time. But it's just one of those things. Hey, if you're planning on playing metal, make sure you get a guitar that will work for that genre. Just kind of like if you're playing, your goal is to play kind of like bluesy stuff and more country music, you probably don't need a Jackson electric guitar. That's probably not going to be the right direction for you. So just, just to kind of throw this out there, not to say you can't play metal or blues or jazz or anything on a Fender Strat. Obviously you can. Not to say you can't play different styles of music on a Gibson Les Paul, because you can, but just because of the way the instrument is wound, so to speak, it's going to inhibit some of the things that are pretty typical in different genres and make them a little bit more, and make it to where it's easier to do one style over another. So if your goal is to do punk rock, I would probably stay away from a Telecaster or a Gibson Les Paul and lean more towards maybe something like a Strat or a Schecter or a Paul Reed Smith, depending on what type of bridge it has on it. But those would be some, better options. If your goal is to do country music, you might want to stay away from things like Schecter or LTS, ESP, or any of these guys. And forgive me if I said the acronym wrong, because it's just not the right tool for the job. So I think a pretty good rule of thumb is when it comes to country music, Fender Telecaster. When it comes to general rock and roll, and I don't mean hard rock, not palm mute specific stuff, but general, like more vintage style music, I think things like a Les Paul, Paul Reed Smith, even actually, I'd say something along the lines of a Les Paul is a good idea. If your goal is just to have a well-rounded guitar that does everything, something along the lines of a Fender Stratocaster is probably a good idea. But if you're trying to do metal, there's a few good guitars, quite a few guitar companies out there that are very good at this, but something along the lines of a Jackson's a pretty good bet. And then, of course, there's companies like Ibanez that make guitars for every type of occasion. But just kind of my 2 cents on that. Okay, and so another thing to take a look at when you're looking into electric guitars are the pickups. Just like I've kind of talked about, how there's the differences in playability with different types of bridges on guitars, and I talked about the stop tailpiece, which is common on Gibson Les Pauls, and then there's a different kind that's common on Fenders and things in that kind of ballpark. Pickups make a huge difference with guitars. So let's use the Fender Stratocaster, a very, very common guitar. Well, I think it's a pretty good overall guitar for doing a lot of different styles of music. I don't really prefer them for any type of alternative rock. Not to say they can't sound good blended in the studio situation, but I generally just don't like the sound in modern rock of a single coil bridge pickup. It's just, and there's a reason why most people use a humbucker. So what is a humbucker versus a single coil? I'm not going to get into all the technical details that I may or may not understand correctly, but if you look at an electric guitar, it's pretty obvious. A humbucker, it's kind of like two single coils very close together. If you look at when it's obvious, I get it. What it is? It's like two single coils real close together. And you'll notice that there's three typical styles of pickup configurations. Not to say there's not others, but I'd say that the three most common are the kind of Fender Strat style where you've got three single coil pickups, one at the neck, one kind of in the middle, and then one at the bridge. And then there's another type, which is kind of a variation of this, where usually the bridge pickup of a Stratocaster is kind of slanted. In this scenario, the neck and middle pickup are two single coils straight up and down, and then the bridge pickup at the very back of the guitar is a humbucker, which is the two dual single coils, so to speak. That's a pretty common configuration. And then the third common configuration is just simply there's not three pickups, there's two of them, but they're two humbuckers, one at the bridge and one at the neck. And that's, those are really the main three pickup configurations you see. Now, I've seen quite a few other ones, but that's kind of more few and far between. I've seen three humbuckers on a guitar, and boy, does that look strange. But I'm sure it sounds great in certain situations. But it's just one of those things. I've never really messed with it too much. And once you kind of play around with these three different configurations, you kind of figure out what they're all about. And you basically plug them into different distortion pedals, and you kind of see where things sound different. You'll notice that the reason why most modern rock will use an electric guitar that has a humbucker pickup at the bridge is because it's a very presency kind of a sound, and it's got a lot of gain. It's just very prominent, and it sounds very good with distortion. And it's kind of like it's already like there's a low cut added, on the bottom toward, a lot of the low is been EQ'd out. It just sounds, but outside of that, it sounds full and bright and just real edgy, and is kind of when you think of rock and roll music, the humbucker at the bridge is really kind of the sound that most people are looking for. So I'd say a lot of rock guitar players never even move their pickup selector switch. It always stays on the bridge humbucker pickup. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But you'll notice that, the neck pickup, whether it be single coil or humbucker, tends to have a very thick, kind of creamy, kind of a bouncy sort of a tone and sound to it, which is maybe not exactly what you want for high gain electric guitars that you'd find in, modern rock and metal, but it sounds really awesome for certain styles like country. Can sound good like this, although it's kind of not in all occasions. It's kind of like the opposite of what you get with a telly, which is a very twangy sound. But in some forms of country, it makes a lot of sense to use that bridge pickup. And then, but the big one is kind of like in your blues and jazz. That's where you really notice, okay, this creamy neck pickup sound is like, oh, this is perfect. It's instant blues. And so when you start playing around on different electric guitars that have different pickup configurations, you kind of figure out, okay, there's a little bit more to than just looking at the bridge, looking at the style. Okay, this is a Fender. That means it's good for blues. Well, maybe not, depends on what you're trying to do with it. I've seen plenty of punk bands using stuff like Telecasters, and it sounded fine, not to say it can't be done, but realize that different guitars are generally used for different styles of music, and that there's a good reason for it. So just a general rule of thumb is if your goal is to do blues or jazz or even country music, I think a Fender Stratocaster is a pretty good all-around guitar. If your goal is to do, a lot of country leads and licks, you might want to go with a Telecaster. But if you're first starting, I think a Stratocaster makes more sense. It's a little bit more of a well-rounded instrument. Now, if your goal is really to do any kind of like modern rock or punk or metal or anything to that extent, I would probably go with something that at the very least has a humbucker at the bridge, whether it has two single coils in front or it just has two humbucker pickups, one at the bridge and one at the neck. But as long as you got that good humbucker pickup at the bridge, you should be able to play a lot of your modern rock. And at this point, you'll notice there's a lot of guitar companies that have this kind of a setup where it's either two single coils in the neck and middle position with a humbucker in the bridge, or it's got just simply put two humbucker pickups. Those kind of guitars, generally they work pretty good for rock as a generality. So, and at that point, when you basically take those two pickup configurations and they'll generally work for rock, while some are a little bit better for certain genres than other. It just kind of helps, take out some of the guessing games. So I think that after talking about the two main styles of bridges on electric guitars and the three different primary pickup configurations, I think that's a pretty good start to getting you on the right track to making the right selection on an electric guitar. Also, there's something to be said about through body construction on the neck, different materials. But if you're just starting out, that stuff isn't as relative. Who cares whether it has a maple neck or this or that and the other thing? Who cares what the guitar is made out of? As long as it's made out of some kind of wood and it stays in tune and it's got the bridge and pickup patterns that you need it to have to be able to play the kind of music you want, you're at least a step ahead of where you might be had you made the wrong decision there. Okay, so it seems like it's taken me longer just to get through, things to look out for when you buy either your first electric or acoustic guitar. I'm not going to bother getting into amps and cables and hardware effects or any of that. That'll just have to come at a later time. But something else I think we need to take into consideration is, what if you have been playing guitar for a few years? What are some of the pitfalls you need to look out for when buying your next guitar? And I think it's really going to be very different and personal to each and every individual. But I think one of the biggest mistakes I've made and I've seen other people make are, okay, so you have that intro level guitar that maybe is worth $150, $200, $300. And so you basically buy something very similar to it that's $500 or $600. And while, yeah, sure, it's a little bit better, it might look cooler, it's new, you really haven't done yourself any favors. It's not that much better of a guitar at that point. I mean, at the point that, a real guitar costs $1,000 and up. That's what in reality, it's a little bit more than that. I'm just saying, at the point that you're going to, buy a second guitar, if it's going to be something similar to what you already have, like, why buy if you already have a Japanese Fender Strat, don't go buy a Mexican one. Just buy the American one if that's what you want. Buy quality. If you're looking to replace what you have, buy the best thing you can get to replace that, because if you don't, you're just going to be buying that mid-grade guitar, which you probably should have bought to begin with. My personal opinion is, if you're going to buy a Fender Strat, buy the Mexican series. It's a little bit more expensive than the Japanese, but they tend to just sound better and play better. And there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, I see a lot of guys out there playing on their Mexican Strats and they sound fine. They play fine. No major issues. I think there's definitely something to be said about the law of diminishing returns when you go from the Mexican Strats to the American. But you know what? At the end of the day, if you're going to be serious and that you're a serious guitar player and you play a Fender Strat, you get an American one. They just sound better. They're just a more quality instrument. Not because America is necessarily a better country, but there's just the American series. It's kind of like their grades, right? The American series just tend to be their top of the line when it comes to, Fender products. Now, something else to take into consideration is, okay, so let's say you were to just take my advice and you went ahead and first guitar you bought was a Mexican Fender Strat. I think that's a pretty solid choice. Maybe not the best choice if you're looking to play hard rock, but I think a Mexican series Fender Strat, whether you buy it new or used, is a pretty good first guitar for a lot of people, because it's good enough to get you through. Even if you start playing live bands, it's good enough to get you through studio work. But so, let's say you already bought a decent mid-level instrument where it's not a toy, it's an actual instrument. Maybe it's not quite as fine of a precision tool as that, $1,500 model above it, but it's a quality tool, right? So at this point, it's like, yeah, that's great, but I'd really like to be able to have a guitar that does other things a little bit better. At that point, that's when it makes a lot of sense to maybe start looking at that Jackson guitar for when you want to do the hard rock thing. That makes sense. So if you already have a $500 Strat, it can make sense to go buy another $500-$600 guitar, as long as it's very, very different from what you currently have. Or heck, buy an acoustic guitar. Right? That makes sense. But like I said before, what doesn't make sense is to buy bottom of the barrel and then upgrade to something that's just a little bit better. Because, there's just, why even waste the money? You're basically just throwing away that $200-$300 you spent on that, Japanese Strat, only to replace it for $500 with something that definitely, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's not better, but it's like, why did you do that to begin with? You should have just bought that from the get-go, right? So I see that happening a lot of time, whether it's with Fender or something else. People replace their Ibanez that's, new cost $250 with a Schecter that costs $400. That just doesn't make sense. There's no real gain in it other than that it might be newer or look a little bit different, but neither of them are going to really sound that much better or play that much better. So all you've just basically done is waste $400. So once again, I just think it's something to take into consideration, is that if you buy cheap, understand that you will be having to upgrade it once you kind of grow out of that instrument. So I highly recommend I'm not saying go drop $3,000 on your first guitar, but man, try to stay away from those sub $200 guitars. They're really toys for the most part. Now, once again, if you're going used, you can find a hell of a deal. And I'm also, be the first one to admit I have found $150 instruments that were surprisingly good for the money and that were a great value, but I wouldn't call them good guitars by any stretch. They sounded average and played decent. I wouldn't say good, but they were playable. But once you put a microphone in front of it, if there are any questions in your mind as to how that acoustic guitar sounds that I got for $110, oh, it's crap. It was just completely unrecordable. Even using dynamics and a ton of notch filtering couldn't make that thing sound good. So if you have any questions or concerns about, buying a cheap instrument, kind of look back at some of the stuff I've talked about. Now, obviously, if your goal is to have a cheap kind of throw around guitar, there's nothing wrong with buying that little $150, toy, so to speak. Because hey, if you accidentally get drunk and the guitar lands in the fire and it burns to a crisp, then who cares? You know what I mean? You're out $150 versus you just completely burned your vintage Gibson 55-year model, oh my gosh, that's a huge thing. So, be smart about your investments and think about the long-term implications. Because if this is something you're going to be serious about, realize that if you buy a toy, A, you're never going to progress, and B, you're going to be replacing it very, very soon. I would guess in the next 3 months, because they just don't play worth a darn. And also keep in mind that there is no point in spending an extra $200 on top of what your current guitar is to quote unquote upgrade. $200 is not an upgrade. $2,000 is an upgrade, but $200 really isn't. But at the same time, if you have a guitar that's more so good for a certain type of genre and you're looking for something that works better for another type, there's nothing wrong with spending something, kind of on the medium grade just to be able to do another type of genre, as well as possible. I think I used the example of, your first guitar was a Mexican Fender Strat. That's a great decision. But if you want to start doing hard rock, it's probably not the best tool for that job. Something along the lines of maybe an ESP or a Jackson might be a better choice, in which case they make mid-grade models, in the $500 range. That'll do the job just fine. But at the same time, okay, so I've got my Fender Strat, and it's good for this, and I've got my Jackson, but I really want something that's just a little bit more metal, and so then you drop $700 on the slightly higher end model of the Jackson. You really haven't done yourself any favors. You might think it sounds better because you have to rationalize it to yourself, but at that point, you really haven't bought that much better of an instrument. Because realize that there is something to be said about the law of diminishing returns when it comes to the price of things. So realistically, you've kind of got your low end, you've got your mid grade, and then you have your super high end. So I think where most people tend to stay is kind of in the mid grade. And once again, there is a difference between, the mid grade could be somewhere in the $400 range to the $1,000 range. At that point, $400 versus $1,000, there is going to be a difference. But just one of those things to keep in mind that if you buy cheap, you buy twice. But generally speaking, if you kind of buy something that's on the upper end of the middle of the road, so to speak, that generally puts you in a safe place to where you've spent your money effectively to get as close to what you can get to a fine precision tool without breaking the bank on something that's, 10% better, but for 80% more money. So general rule of thumb, buy something that's maybe more so down the middle of the road because you'll get much more use out of it in the long run. All right, guys, thanks for listening. I'll see y'all next time.